Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents When Abortion Was a Crime, Women, Medicine, and Law in the United States, 1867 to 1973, by Leslie J. Reagan. Narrated by Rosemary Benson. Introduction. There would be no history of illegal abortion to tell without the continuing demand for abortion from women, regardless of law. Generations of women persisted in controlling their reproduction through abortion and made abortion an issue for legal and medical authorities. Those women, their lives, and their perspectives are central in this book. Their demand for abortions, generally hidden from public view and rarely spoken of in public, transformed medical practice and law over the course of the 20th century. This book analyzes the triangle of interactions among the medical profession, state authorities, and women in the practice, policing and politics of abortion during the era when abortion was a crime. As individual women consulted with doctors, they made them understand their needs. Sympathy for their female patients drew physicians into the world of abortion, in spite of legal and professional prohibitions. Indeed, it was physicians and lawyers who initiated the earliest efforts to rewrite the abortion laws. Ultimately, women's pressing need for abortion fueled a mass movement that succeeded in reversing public policy toward abortion in the 1960s and early 1970s. Public policy made at the national and state levels deserves to be examined where it was carried out, at the local level, in one-on-one interactions, and on a day-to-day basis. Understanding the impact of abortion law requires analyzing the actual practice of abortion and the state's enforcement of the criminal laws. The stunning transformation in law and public policy regarding abortion and women's rights was rooted in the declining conditions of abortion under the criminal law, and built on generations of women demanding abortions and getting them. This is the first study of the entire era of illegal abortion in the United States. Most scholarship on abortion has focused on two moments of legal change: when abortion was criminalized in the mid-19th century, and when it was decriminalized 100 years later in the mid-1960s and early 1970s. The century of illegal abortion is typically treated as obscure and unchanging. I find, however, that the history of illegal abortion was dynamic, not static. This book joins a growing literature that interrogates and reconceptualizes the relationship between the public and the private. The 19th century ideology of separate spheres bifurcated the world into the public sphere, the world of politics and business in which men lived, and the private sphere, the domestic world of women and children. The concept of separate spheres proved to be fruitful for women's historians and produced an abundance of important new insights and knowledge. Recently, however, women's historians have questioned the idea of separate spheres, both because it excluded the majority of women who were working class or women of color, and because it inaccurately described white middle-class life. The worlds of men and women no longer appear to be as exclusive and separate as once thought. Men lived in the private sphere, too, and women walked on public streets, participated in business, worked for wages, and intervened in political life. Indeed, women created issues of national political importance. Of recently renewed theoretical interest to a variety of scholars is the public sphere itself. Here, attention has been on the nature of the public sphere, its membership, democratic discourse, citizenship, and the formation of public opinion and debate. This book challenges the dichotomy between public and private in another way. It looks more toward the private sphere and finds interaction between what have been assumed to be two distinct spheres. The relationship between public and private is dynamic. It is not just that the public has invaded private life or that excluded politically unrecognized groups, including women, have found ways to move into public life. Rather, during the period of this study, the private invaded the public. Abortion is an example of how private activities and conversations reshaped public policy. The words and needs of women had the power to change medicine, law, and public debate. The public sphere, moreover, was not the only place where crucial communication and spirited debate occurred. They occurred in private arenas, such as the home and the medical office. Those conversations, generally designated private and thus irrelevant to public discourse, impacted debates in the public sphere and eventually changed public policy. For over a century, women challenged public policy and altered medical thinking and practice through their conversation and activity in private arenas. I use the terms private and public, but with a sense of their ambiguity and interaction. Analysis of public policy should examine how policy has been implemented and by whom, rather than be narrowly restricted to federal legislation or agency activity. Looking at statutes alone, or the actions of legislators or the judiciary, inhibits our view of how law works, how public policy is made, and who acts on behalf of the state to enforce the law. Abortion serves as a case study for rethinking the nature of the state in the United States. Much of the regulation of abortion was carried out not by government agents, but by voluntary agencies and individuals. The state expected the medical profession to assist in enforcing the law. It may be more accurate to think of the state apparatus not as the government, but as consisting of official agencies that work in conjunction with other semi-official agencies. State officials, this history and others show, have often relied on private agents to act as part of the state. Feminist scholars in the 1970s tended to see the medical profession as the source of the regulation of female sexuality and reproduction. But the medical profession's role was more complex. This book shifts attention to the state's interest in controlling abortion and the alliance between medicine and the state. It would have been virtually impossible for the state to enforce the criminal abortion laws without the cooperation of physicians. State officials won medical cooperation in suppressing abortion by threatening doctors and medical institutions with prosecution or scandal. Physicians learned to protect themselves from legal trouble by reporting to officials women injured or dying as a result of illegal abortions. By the 1940s and 1950s, physicians and hospitals had become so accustomed to this regulatory stance toward women and abortion that they instituted new regulations to observe and curb the practice of abortion in the hospital. The medical profession and its institutions acted as an arm of the state. Yet the medical profession's position was contradictory. While physicians helped control abortion, they too were brought under greater control. State officials demanded that the profession police the practices of its members. The duty of self-policing and physicians' fears of prosecution for abortion created dilemmas for doctors who at times compromised their duties to patients in order to carry out their duties to the state. Furthermore, plenty of physicians provided abortions. This book points to the power of patients, even female patients, to influence and change medical practice. The widespread practice of abortion by physicians attests to both the ability of patients to communicate their needs to physicians and the ability of physicians to listen. Physicians' practices were shaped by the experiences and perspectives of private life. not only by professional anti-abortion values. The physician-patient relationship was often more close than distant. This was particularly true in the early 20th century, but became more class-stratified as medicine became increasingly specialized and hospital-oriented. Medicine was more of a negotiated terrain between physicians and patients than has been realized. The peaks of the medical profession's public hostility to abortion have obscured the depth of medical involvement in abortion. The anti-abortion stance of organized medicine should not be mistaken for an accurate representation of the views and practices of the entire profession. This study views the medical profession as complex and composed of competing groups with opposing views and practices, rather than as a unified whole. The medical profession was not monolithic, but divided in its attitude toward abortion and in its treatment of patients. This book differentiates between organized medicine and individual physicians. By organized medicine, I mean medicine's institutional structures, such as the American Medical Association, AMA, and other medical societies, medical schools, and hospitals that produced the official public image of the profession and acted in concert with the state. Furthermore, this study distinguishes between prescriptive commentary about medical practices, as found in the medical literature, and actual practice by physicians. These official and instructional materials reveal the thought and perhaps the practice of only a few. Finally, attention to specialization is crucial. Specialists played critical public roles in the history of abortion. Their interests and those of general practitioners were not identical. This book is the first to chart the nation's enforcement of the criminal abortion laws. To understand the power of law in the lives of the masses of Americans requires that one take seriously the experiences of ordinary people caught in criminal investigations. Thus, it is necessary to analyze the processes and routine procedures of the legal system that shape those experiences. Most historians of crime and punishment have focused on police and prisons, while historians of women and the law have focused mainly on marriage and property rights, not crime. Surprisingly little historical work has examined the relationship between medicine and law. Few have studied law in practice. Analysis of the day-to-day workings of the legal system, rather than statutory changes, judicial rulings, or the volume of cases, reveals how the law intervened in the lives of ordinary citizens to regulate reproductive and sexual behavior. Punishment for violation of the law and sexual norms has been gendered. In abortion cases, the investigative procedures themselves constituted a form of punishment and control for women. Publicity and public exposure of women's transgressions further served as punishment. This form of punishment served, in Michel Foucault's words, as a school. The shame of public exposure was for all of the potentially guilty, not only the individual who had been caught. This 18th century mode of punishment, thought to have been replaced by the surveillance of the prison, persisted in the state's response to women and their sexual crimes. Without analyzing gender, we cannot fully understand the systems of punishment. Even as the abortion statutes remained the same through this period, the meaning of the law and the legality and illegality of abortion changed over time. Law is not fixed, but fluid. The criminal abortion laws passed in every state by 1880 made exceptions for therapeutic abortions performed in order to save a woman's life. Because the laws governing abortion did not precisely define what was criminal and what was not, this had to be worked out in practice, in policing, and in the courts. The complexity of defining legal and illegal abortions for medical practitioners and legal authorities alike, the gray and ever-shifting nature of criminality, is an important theme in this book. Nor was medical understanding of therapeutic abortion stable. Medicine, too, is interpretive and changing. Throughout the period of illegal abortion, physicians disagreed on the conditions that mandated a therapeutic abortion and on the methods. There was no consensus. Changes in medicine influenced legal definitions of crime. At the same time, the law shaped medical thinking and practice. The medical profession and the legal profession each looked to the other to define the legality of abortion practices. Therapeutic abortion became increasingly important in the 1930s. By the 1960s, the practice and non-practice of therapeutic abortion was at the very heart of the campaign to reform and repeal the criminal abortion laws. The illegality of abortion has hidden the existence of an inarticulated, alternative, popular morality, which supported women who had abortions. This popular ethic contradicted the law, the official attitude of the medical profession, and the teachings of some religions. Private discussions among family and friends, conversations between women and doctors, and the behavior of women, and the people who aided them, suggest that traditional ideas that accepted early abortions endured into the 20th century. Furthermore, through the 1920s, at least, working-class women did not make a distinction between contraceptives and abortion. What I call a popular morality that accepted abortion was almost never publicly expressed, but was rooted in people's daily lives. Americans have a long history of accepting abortion in certain situations as a necessity and as a decision that, implicitly, belongs to women to make. This popular attitude made itself felt in the courts and in doctors' offices. Prosecutors found it difficult to convict abortionists because juries regularly nullified the law by acquitting abortionists, and few physicians escaped the pressure from women for abortions. Throughout the period of illegal abortion, women asserted their need for abortion, and in doing so implicitly asserted their sense of having a right to control their own reproduction. I am not suggesting a gap between people's beliefs and their ability to live up to them, but different, even oppositional, moral perspectives. The values expressed by ordinary people deserve to be taken seriously, rather than categorized and dismissed as sinful or mistaken. Though some felt guilt about abortion and found ways to justify their behavior, others never held the official anti-abortion views. Prescribed morality and popular morality may not be identical. Analysis of women's practices and ideas, popular behavior and belief, rather than exclusive focus on the statements of male theologians and philosophers, suggests that it is incorrect to conclude that hostility to abortion is almost an absolute value in history. The reverse may be more accurate. Although this book takes note of religious teachings and the religious background of women who had abortions, it does not focus on religious opinion. Organized religion had little interest in abortion until it entered the public political arena in the late 1950s and early 1960s. There was no reason to energetically fight abortion when, for nearly a century, abortion was a crime, and no social movement suggested otherwise. From the 1920s on, however, there was much religious interest in and division over another method of reproductive control: contraception. Birth control became a topic of interest because a movement advocated women's right to reproductive control. Further, it is incorrect to assume that the Catholic Church has always organized against abortion, or that all Catholics subscribe to the views of their church leaders. Indeed, many Catholics shared what I have described as a popular ethic accepting abortion. A good history of religion and reproductive control would examine not only theology and sermons, but also the attitudes and actions of the congregations, with particular attention to women. Women who had abortions did so within a context of illegality and religious disapproval, but the prohibitions were ambiguous. Christian traditions had tabooed abortion since antiquity, but the acceptance of abortion in order to save the life of a pregnant woman had a long tradition as well. Until the mid-19th century, the Catholic Church implicitly accepted early abortions prior to ensoulment. Not until 1869, at about the same time that abortion became politicized in this country, did the Church condemn abortion. In 1895, it condemned therapeutic abortion. Protestant churches accepted abortion when pregnancy threatened a woman's life, a view shared by the medical profession and written into the nation's laws. Jewish tradition clearly viewed the woman's life as primary. The Mishnah, a code of ancient Jewish law that guided later rabbinic thought, required abortion when childbirth threatened a woman's life, for her life takes precedence over its life. This study points to the importance of studying the social history of sexuality, as well as the medical and legal discourse about it. These discourses regarding abortion are important because they introduced new meanings of abortion and shaped people's views and fears of abortion and sexuality. I analyzed the language women used to describe abortion and the production of stories about abortion in the press and in the courtroom. Yet exclusive attention to professional or even popular discourse about abortion would result in a distorted picture of that history. Medical discourse has convinced some scholars that physicians did not perform abortions in the period of illegal abortion. And most press coverage of abortion in the early 20th century gives the misleading impression that abortion was universally condemned and generally fatal. These conclusions are not correct. Analysis of discourse alone would miss the ongoing medical practice of abortion in total contradiction of official medical mores. As others have pointed out, Foucault's theory concerning the production of sexuality through discourse ignores differences in the power of individuals and social groups to enter and shape discourse. The publicly articulated and published discussion of abortion rarely included the voices or perspectives of women who had abortions, except to provide shocking examples of depraved womanhood. Women who had abortions did not intervene to explain themselves, but instead, in other non-public arenas, made their perspectives known and acted to obtain a much-needed method for preventing births. More tolerant attitudes toward abortion, rooted in material experiences, persisted in the face of a public discourse that denounced it. The history of sexuality and reproduction demands a combined analysis of ideas and practice. Common law and the criminalization of abortion. Abortion was not always a crime. During the 18th and early 19th centuries, abortion of early pregnancy was legal under common law. Abortions were illegal only after quickening, the point at which a pregnant woman could feel the movements of the fetus, approximately the 4th month of pregnancy. The common law's attitude toward pregnancy and abortion was based on an understanding of pregnancy and human development as a process, rather than an absolute moment. Indeed, the term abortion referred only to the miscarriages of later pregnancies after quickening. What we would now identify as an early induced abortion was not called an abortion at all. If an early pregnancy ended, it had slipped away, or the menses had been restored. At conception and the earliest stage of pregnancy before quickening, no one believed that a human life existed. Not even the Catholic Church took this view. Rather, the popular ethic regarding abortion and common law were grounded in the female experience of their own bodies. Colonial and early 19th century women, historians have learned, perceived conception as the blocking or obstructing of menstruation, which required attention. The cessation of the menses indicated a worrisome imbalance in the body and the need to bring the body back into balance by restoring the flow. This idea of menstruation corresponded with medical and popular understanding of sickness and health. The body was a delicate system of equilibrium that could easily be thrown out of balance by a change in weather or diet, for example, and that then needed to be restored through active intervention. A disruption in the healthy body, in the worldview of patients and physicians, required a visible, often violent physical response to treatment in order to restore equilibrium. This theory underlay 18th and 19th century regular medical practice, which emphasized heroic measures, bleeding, blistering, purging, and puking, in response to sickness. The response to the blocking of the menses was part of this shared understanding of the body. Women took drugs in order to make their menses regular, and regarded the ensuing vomiting and evacuation as evidence of the drug's effective action. Restoring the menses was a domestic practice. The power of certain herbs to restore menstruation was widely known. One colonial woman who feared pregnancy had twice taken savin, once boiled in milk and the other time strained through a cloth. Savin, derived from juniper bushes, was the most popular abortifacient and easily acquired since junipers grew wild throughout the country. Other herbs used as abortifacients included pennyroyal, tansy, ergot, and Seneca snakeroot. Slave women used cottonroot. Many of these useful plants could be found in the woods or cultivated in gardens, and women could refer to home medical guides for recipes for bringing on the menses. Both of these concepts, blocked menses and quickening, must be taken seriously by late 20th century observers. Blocked menses cannot be dismissed as an excuse made by women who knew they were pregnant. Quickening was a moment recognized by women and by law as a defining moment in human development. Once quickening occurred, women recognized a moral obligation to carry the fetus to term. This age-old idea underpinned the practice of abortion in America. The legal acceptance of induced miscarriages before quickening tacitly assumed that women had a basic right to bodily integrity. By the mid-18th century, the most common means of inducing abortion, by taking drugs, was commercialized. The availability of abortifacients was so well known that a common euphemism described their use. When Sarah Grosvenor, a Connecticut farm girl, confided to her sister in 1742 that she was taking the trade, her sister understood. That Grosvenor successfully conveyed her meaning to her sister in 3 metaphoric words tells us a great deal about the world of mid-18th century New England. Many New Englanders, including these sisters, knew the possibility of inducing an abortion by purchasing and ingesting drugs. The need for a euphemism tells of the difficulty of speaking openly about sex and reproductive control, and of the need for secrecy. Yet it reveals an awareness that women could and did regulate their own fertility through abortion. Furthermore, abortifacients had become a profitable product sold by doctors, apothecaries, and other healers. The first statutes governing abortion in the United States, James Moore has found, were poison control measures designed to protect pregnant women, like Grosvenor, by controlling the sale of abortifacient drugs, which often killed the women who took them. The proliferation of entrepreneurs who openly sold.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?